Welcome to Behind the ABA Talk podcast, where we have heart-to-heart conversations with expert speakers from the Ellis Gurdin Consulting Continuing Education Program hosted by Behavior Live. Join us as we learn more about the professional journeys and hear about what inspires them to do their amazing work. I'm your host, Lisa Gurdin, founder of Ellis Gurdin Consulting. I just want to say a quick thank you to our continuing education partners and sponsors, Massachusetts Partnership for Youth, Lab Collaborative, Accept Collaborative, and QBS Safety Care. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Ryan Baker-Barrett. He is the founder of Applied Behavioral Health Practice, which is a practice he launched in August 2024. His mission is to provide science-backed practical support for individuals with ADHD. He's based in San Diego and draws on over a decade of experience working in school systems across the country. Today, he combines behavioral expertise with lived experience to help families, educators, and professionals navigate the realities of ADHD with clarity and compassion. Welcome, Ryan.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. And you and I met a few years ago when you were a behavior analyst for a school, a local school here in Massachusetts.
That's right. Yeah, I had about a 5-year stint in Massachusetts, some time in Connecticut, some time in Maryland, some time in Utah, and now out here in California.
Yeah,
So,
you've been all over the
yeah,
place.
yeah. It's one of those double-edged swords, a blessing and a curse, where,
Yeah.
personally, I don't get to establish roots, but then professionally, I get to experience school systems and what works, what doesn't work, and yeah, get to give some guidance and input on that.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking before we started about the differences in resources and in
Hmm.
organizational sort of processes and values in different parts of the country. And here in Massachusetts, it's, very different than in other places.
Yeah.
And we don't always realize that, oh, it's
Hmm.
not the same somewhere else. And then we get there and we're like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, we're not in Massachusetts
Yeah.
anymore.
No. So for every BCBA working in Massachusetts, when you feel strapped, you have it really good.
Yeah. Yeah, you were saying there was like one behavior analyst for a huge school district, you
Yes.
said.
Yes. So my kid's school district is the second largest in California, and they have one BCBA,
Hmm.
maybe two. Um, but I
Okay.
don't know if both of them are working in the capacity as a BCBA. So really
Yeah.
just, I think, one BCBA for
Wow.
too many kids.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And as we know, the need for services and extra support is
Mhm.
just increasing. It's definitely not going the other way. Um,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
all right, well, let's talk about a little bit more about that journey in ABA as you've moved around and had to adjust to different locations and different, like I said, organizations and so forth. Can you just share briefly kind of how you got into ABA and your journey, and then how that took you kind of to this amazing world of ADHD?
Yeah. So my ABA journey started when I came across a neighbor who was a duly certified LCSW and BCBA. And so at the time I was working in a community-based supports for adults with severe and persistent mental illness, while also volunteering for her organization, which is a group home for adults with disabilities. So I sort of started off wanting to become an LCSW, and was very fortunate to have someone like that who had sort of a dual certification. So I was professionally working more on the LCSW track, but then volunteering towards the ABA track. And then in northern Utah, where I lived, they launched the University Utah State launched their first master's cohort around the time that I would have been applying to become an LCSW. So I decided, you know what, this is just a perfect opportunity to just get into that ABA thing. Um, it's sort of interesting because I think with the experience that I had, ABA for me wasn't maybe what it is for other people. I originally saw it as sort of a comprehensive way to look at what's going on in someone's life. And have a planful approach to independence, um, which I don't think is always true for a lot of ABA programs. So I'd say that was sort of a holistic approach that I think I was fortunate to have um, early on in my career.
I think it's so great when people have that clinical background as well and that clinical knowledge. I think if I were to go back and do it all again, I would have, gone the clinical psych and ABA
Yeah,
route combined.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, because I definitely love collaborating with mental health professionals and find it's absolutely necessary, particularly given, anytime we have working with an individual who has anxiety, depression, bipolar, combination thereof. It's just so essential to what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So then from there, it just, getting into the master's program just, took off. I loved it. I was a big, obviously a big proponent of ABA. Um, and then I think, my interest in ADHD started to take off around the time that I moved to Massachusetts. Um, the school district that I first worked in there, I was working in a number of programs, that sort of served the continuum of the autism spectrum. Um, and I started to see this pattern with a lot of the middle schoolers that, right, that for many of the kids, autism wasn't the thing we needed to address so much as the ADHD, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kids with fleeting attention or really strong interests that were just occupying all their mind and all their time. And yes, those things can be part of ADHD, but I uh, started to appreciate that a little more. And then when I turned 37, I got my own diagnosis of ADHD. And so I think that speaks for itself. Um, and so as I was supporting those kids, right, I was really trying hard to find what is the evidence base out there for ADHD and ABA. And there's a lot of good stuff, but there's also not a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of started to take the approach of like, how do I wish people would treat me differently? Right. And so I can think of one specific example where, we had a kid who just really had a hard time paying attention in class and was, often having the imaginary video games and, things I think any behavior analyst can relate to. Is trying to approach it and trying all the token systems, point systems, and just not getting, making progress, but just not getting the progress that you would hope for. And so I, was thinking, when people are trying to get my attention, what do I wish they would do? Like, I wish that they would just come over, tap my shoulder, not even say anything, just put a hand on my shoulder gently, and then just wait for me to notice them. And so with that kiddo, that's what we started doing originally was kind of a progressive time delay. We would start with the immediate hand on the shoulder, and sometimes it would be 15, 20 seconds before he would, acknowledge people. But we were able to shorten that time. Um, and then we were able to replace it with, the look, um, which I know is not
Mm-hmm.
a operational definition, but hopefully it resonates with people where you think about, a parent who may have given you the look when you're off track and you know what that means. Not that we were shooting nasty facial expressions to the kid, but, just to give him that very clear and obvious look. Um, And then we were able to fade that out. And rather than focusing on how are we going to get him to pay attention, we really focused on how are we going to get him to notice that he's not paying attention. And then from there, how are we going to get him to communicate and advocate for himself?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it became less of you just need to stop doing this. And it's, hey, when you do this, here's what you should do. You can just say, oh, hey, so sorry. Can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said. And it was kind of really cool to watch how just that simple thing generalized across his world. And we had a parent who was pretty difficult who started to say, hey, like I can actually see the gains that he's making. And it was just this one simple thing that we had changed that he started noticing all the ways that his ADHD was impairing his attention and then was able to shift and reframe and advocate. Um, So yeah, so I'd say that's how my interest really took off. And then, another job that helped take off, I was helping a school district with their home support services. And I went into the job thinking I'm going to be working, primarily with kids on the spectrum who are, kind of at that cusp of do they go residential? Can the district serve them? Or if they are residential, is it time to bring them back in? Um, And then I found that, upwards of probably 90% of the kids that I was working with were kids with ADHD. And I think that came about because, right, in Massachusetts and many states, kids with autism are getting insurance-based services. We can criticize are the services quality, et cetera. But by and large, the kids with autism are getting served. The families with ADHD, not so much. Um, a lot of great resources out there, but sometimes not that behavior analytic approach that can really support what the families need. And so my job became almost a full-time job of helping kids with ADHD who the systems were not supporting well to get back to school, right? It had progressed so much that they weren't making it to school. And so it was, how do we motivate a kid with ADHD, which is a challenge? And how do we motivate them to go back to school where they don't feel included? It's probably the most difficult cases that I've ever had, to be honest.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
cases, school avoidance and school refusal is really, really hard. And they're so complex. And oftentimes, by the time we get
Mhm.
involved, there's this now long
Yeah.
history of punishment, really, of negativity and
Hmm.
punishment and avoidance and escape. And we know that avoidance and escape is so strong as reinforcers, and
Hmm.
it's so hard to flip for kids. And I think it's so important to like fully understand a child, like you're talking about, like fully understand them and think about the ways that we can support them on the antecedent side. Like, what are all those
Yeah.
proactive strategies we can use so they feel supported, they get what they need, and they can actually be successful. Because when in their life have kids with
Yeah.
ADHD been successful? Not oftentimes it's, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not very
Hmm.
often.
Yeah. And I think I say this in every single training that I give just to remind people just how impacted ADHD can be.
Yeah.
Um, and I hope I don't mess up the stat, but it's something like 20,000 kids with ADHD will hear 20,000 more negative messages than their
Mm,
peers by the time they turn 12.
makes sense.
And,
Hmm.
just the constant, and I think, I'm guilty of this as a parent of kids with ADHD. And I think since the last time we spoke, my youngest got diagnosed. Yay. Um,
Yeah.
So, even for me as a parent with all the training that
Hmm.
I have and having ADHD myself, I still am part of that 20,000 negative message.
Hmm.
And so to think, for the families who don't have the background, don't have the training,
Right.
that could be much, much more challenging.
Right. And those negative messages and those negative responses or those reprimands are more predictable than the positive reinforcement or the praise or the positive
Hmm.
feedback that they may get. So why would you go with unpredictable responses?
Yeah.
Go with what you know? And
Yeah.
so they learn that they learn very quickly. And so it's hard for them day in and,
It
and,
is.
and day out.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of laughing to myself as you talked about the predictability because I think of like so many times with my oldest where, I'm like, okay, Ryan, do better. Like, this, positive messages, and so it's like the times that I'm like really focused on like, okay, I'm going to be positive. You're right. And I go to
Yeah.
open my mouth to give a compliment and he's like, ah, I know, I should do better. I'm like, no, 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 hold on. Right. But it
Yeah.
speaks to that predictability that like, it's just such a
Yeah.
natural part of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, and we need to like be aware of it as adults and change our habits, and it's so hard. So I know that our understanding, at least my own understanding of ADHD, um, has definitely changed over the past little bit. I'm not exactly sure when we learned so much more about ADHD, but maybe you can talk about that because it's not just this attention deficit hyperactivity, someone who
Yeah.
can't pay attention or is moving too much to pay attention. Like we grew up with. Like that's what we thought ADHD was, right? And I
Yeah.
thought up until like a few years ago, I think. And there's a whole new comprehensive, understanding of ADHD. So maybe you can, share that because I don't know how many people know that. It was new to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I can probably talk about this in the context of how I missed my own diagnosis because you're right, right? Like I was noticing some things about myself that I didn't know what it was. And I think for a period of time, I was like, gosh, do I have autism? Um,
Mhm.
but nothing, I wasn't the hyperactive kid. You know, didn't, I wasn't always on the go, like the
Yeah,
question in the assessment says. And so I think some of that is that misunderstanding, and probably a lot of it is attributed to the actual label itself, attention deficit, right?
yeah.
Like you just can't pay attention. And, one of the things that I got a lot of criticism for was actually the opposite, like my ability to hyperfocus.
Hmm.
Um, and, even to the extent that, one of my very first career job, right, working in an outplacement school with kids who had very dangerous behavior. And it wasn't a kid on my caseload, but I can still remember the day I'm sitting in my office, like trying to just pump out an FBA. And the director of the school was standing out in my office for who knows how long and says to me, like, Ryan, aren't you going to go help with that kid? I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, he's been screaming for the last 10, 15 minutes. It's like, well, I didn't notice. I'm so sorry. I've got this report, and that is the only thing
Hmm.
that I can perceive at this time.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's, hindsight is 2020. So I can look back on all those types of experiences and say, like, okay, that was ADHD for me. Um, so yeah, coming back to that label, attention deficit, one of the things that I talk about a lot in my trainings is ADHD isn't a deficit of attention. It's actually an overabundance of dysregulated attention, right? And so it's attention, you think of like a river that just has no bounds. It just goes where it can. Um, some people have described it as, you're trying to watch TV and else has the remote and they're flipping through channels. And just when you're into one thing, the channel changes.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know if it's so much a new experience or a new understanding of ADHD, but kind of more of this awareness that there is so much more about ADHD than just the hyperactive part. That dysregulated attention is
Yeah.
a big component.
That's a good way to think about it. I know I learned also about the impact on, of executive functioning, with kids with ADHD, with people with ADHD, the executive
Hmm.
functioning skills,
Yep.
of self-monitoring, self-awareness, organization, time, management, planning, emotional regulation, attending, working memory. Did I get all
Hmm.
of them?
Yeah.
That all of that is impacted as well. And maybe you can, what do you see with regards to executive functioning?
Yeah, I mean, that is the bulk of what I try to address with people is, if like you're thinking about, okay, I've got a kid who is quote unquote off task. Okay, well, what does off task really mean? And you think about, does this kid fluently initiate tasks? Because task initiation, part of
Mhm.
executive function is really impaired with ADHD. And kids with ADHD just don't initiate tasks naturally. It has to be taught. And,
Mhm.
how do you scaffold that? How do you support that? I think it comes back to something that I struggled with when I was early in my career, before becoming a behavior analyst is, these four functions. Like, can we really, this is what I would thought at the time, really attribute all behavior to just four functions, right? And I think what we talk about with executive function kind of highlights some of that, right, off task is escape function. But when we break it down a little bit, there's a deficit of executive function that's driving that function of behavior. Sorry, so many uses of the word function.
Hmm.
It's tripping me up a little. And so thinking through, okay, so we've got a kid with ADHD, function of behavior as escape. What does that actually look like? And kind of trying to get our assessments a little bit more detailed. One of the things, one of the kids that I was assessing one time, that maybe I wouldn't have noticed. It was sort of an insignificant thing. But when the teacher asked the kids to get started, he just immediately popped up. And one of the things that he sought out was a pencil that was in his line of sight on the floor, right? And so for me, that was obvious, right? Because I do stuff like this where it's like, hey, get started. And instead of just looking at your immediate space, it's just impulsively, what is, I need a pencil. There's a pencil. It's right there, but
I'm
it's
gonna go
far
get
away,
it.
but I'm
Yeah.
gonna go get it. And then in the process of going to get it, a lot of other stuff happened. That maybe I think if, 10 years earlier in my career, I would have been focused on maybe some of the wrong things there.
Yeah.
And so then just thinking through, okay, how do we support his executive function there? Okay, we're going to have, a labeled place where the pencil goes on his desk. Simple antecedent strategy.
Hmm.
Didn't fix everything, but it fixed part of the task initiation challenge for that kid. Um, and kind of, I guess, thinking through some of those things, like what is the child actually struggling with? And it was interesting too, because, I at some point did ask the kid, like, hey, I noticed when the teacher said get started, you ran for the pencil far away from you. And he was like, well, yeah, like I've got ADHD. Like I never have a sharpened pencil, so why would I look in my desk? I was like, okay.
Fair.
He's like,
That's
or I
fair.
lose it all the time. It's like, so why would I even look? And I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna teach you how not to lose your pencil. But I just thought that insight was kind of interesting, right? That I went
Yeah.
in with some reason, like, okay, it's just in his line of sight, it's easy for him. But what he was actually reporting was, right, I'm not going to look in my own desk because
Right.
I'm disorganized and it won't be there.
He's learned, right? He's
Yeah,
looked enough times before to know
yeah,
and to predict that it's not going to be there. So
yeah,
that's part of his learning
yeah,
history.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is 'cause I have a lot of kids with ADHD on my caseload as well, and I think about it. Um, the executive function sort of supports as motivating operations, right? So in those
Mhm.
situations, when a task is being presented, maybe they're, thinking about something in their head or they're doing something that they really want. Not only do they not hear the time to transition, but they're
Mhm.
hyper focused and they don't want to transition. They're good the way they are. Like they're fine. They're
Yeah.
enjoying. And so if you kind of, nudge them to go and transition, now the value of escape or avoidance in that moment is much higher,
Yep.
right? So for me, it's like figuring out, okay, how can we avoid that, right? How can we make escape and avoidance not a reinforcer in that moment? What can we do in
Hmm.
to make the task easier, more interesting? Can we engage? What can we do on the antecedent side and the MO side to shift the reinforcer in that moment? So that's the way I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's how I think about
It
it.
it does. Yeah. Yeah, and my mind always comes back to the universal design and
Yeah.
something, that one of my supervisors said early on, like one of the big changes that happened in the medical field was the universal precautions, right? And I think right
Yes.
now we're experiencing, universal design as kind of a movement in education that's really kind of a similar approach. Let's engage all people as though, they have dysregulated attention.
Yep.
And it's not just beneficial for that child, but it's beneficial for all children.
Yes, I
And
love that approach. And I think, we're getting to the point where we're a third to a half of kids at any given class at any given time have some diagnosis, whether it's autism, ADHD,
mhm,
anxiety, all three, two of the three, so we're talking about a significant number of kids who need those extra supports. So that makes
yes,
so much sense to me.
yeah. Yeah, and I think as
Yeah,
behavior analysts, like we are so well equipped to be part of that change. And I think many of us are. I'm not
yes,
trying to criticize, but to really highlight that we have the experience, we have the training to really
yes,
support that universal approach that would benefit so many kids with ADHD.
yes,
Because you think, thinking of it another way, like how many times do we get frustrated because we think like, gosh, if this classroom was just designed this way, right? And there's no individual intervention is going to change some of that structural piece, right? If we could just get teachers doing a lot more active responding in their lessons,
yes,
if we could just get kids moving around a little bit more instead of sitting for 20 minutes,
yes,
um,
yes.
and approaching it at the individual level sometimes damages our relationships because we're trying to
Yeah,
change what we can't. Whereas if we take that universal precaution, universal design approach,
yeah.
we can nudge things along.
Yeah, it's so interesting because oftentimes what I see is we're focusing on this happened to me last week. I was observing one child who the teacher was talking about wasn't paying attention, wasn't responding, and she was just doing a read aloud for like 20, 25 minutes to to a small group class of kids who have diagnoses, ADHD, autism. I'm not exactly sure what they all were, but there was definitely not more than one autistic ADHD child in the class. And she didn't do any of those things, and he didn't look any different than anybody else in that class. I don't know. You don't even know. I don't know who was paying attention. I don't
Yeah,
know if they ever turned the page. Like there was he didn't look any different.
yeah,
And so we sometimes get hyper focused on that one child and we're forgetting, wait, what's going on around? Oh,
yeah,
like
yeah.
a lot of the kids are doing the same thing. So maybe we can shift over here. But that buy-in from teachers is hard. Like, how have you
It is.
had success with shifting teachers over to that universal design approach? I think it's really hard.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm the expert there because I'd say I probably have damaged more relationships than I've helped.
Ugh,
But I think we just keep at it, keep trying and
yeah,
highlighting the people who do it well. I remember
yeah.
this one particular cohort of kids that I supported, they all had this like language instead of taking I think they had the option to take like a gosh, why am I blanking on this? Like an academic strategies class or a
Oh,
language
yeah,
class.
yeah.
And some of the parents were from the background. Um, and so they wanted their kids to take the language instead of the academic strategies. And, a lot of people are like, oh, I just don't think that's what they need. And then I went and observed the class, and here are these two, three kids who every teacher is, messaging me about every single day. Here's the other thing that they did, and this, right? And I go into this class, and the teacher has such tight stimulus control that not a single kid is off task.
Hmm.
It's 20 kids in the classroom. Every single kid is responding. Every single kid is engaged, including the ones on my caseload who typically weren't. And it, I think, speaks to that point of, highlighting that teacher success and like, hey, can you help train other teachers who are struggling?
Yes.
Um, flagging for the administrator, hey, like, can you go watch this class because I have never seen these two, three kids so on track.
Yeah.
Can you observe and just like let me know what it is that this teacher is doing that works so well?
That's a great idea of having, highlighting what teachers are doing well and having the administrator check it out and
Yeah.
figuring out then how to get other teachers and using those internal
Hmm.
resources and sharing. of those strategies. I think that's a great
Yeah.
way to approach it.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like one of the biggest things in our field is, praise, behavior specific praise, right? And hey, this teacher flawlessly demonstrated active student responding. Like, can we get her to train other teachers on how to do that?
Yeah. Oh,
Because
that's great.
she's
Yeah.
she's going to do it so much better than I would. Because yeah,
Right. And oftentimes it's from teacher to teacher is
yeah,
better received than we as behavior analysts come in and tell teachers what to do. Oftentimes is that peer to peer, particularly with teachers, that can be super effective, and much more effective than we can be at times, at least. When you think about, all this, the kiddos that you've supported, what behaviors do you tend to see um, for in with kids that are diagnosed with ADHD?
yeah. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the behavior that tends to be obvious, like the out of seat and the
Yeah,
off task. Because I think that's something that we get. So I want to maybe talk about some of the things that we don't always notice. Things like, when you have an impairment of executive function, retrieving materials and putting them back in the same place, impossible. It has to be taught and it has to be visual supports. Um, Another thing that I talk to parents about almost constantly is self-esteem, right? And I don't know that we as behavior analysts are comfortable all the time talking about self-esteem because it feels so mentalistic. Um, but we have got to protect their self-esteem and we have got to teach them strategies of reframing, strategies of positive self-talk, and I think, that's one that I think we're comfortable with, right? Is how do you teach a kid to make positive comments about themselves? Um, yeah, I'd say, that is a big one. And in fact, my youngest, who's like just a very confident and socially engaged kid, when he was diagnosed, the psychologist was so emphatic, like above all else, he's going to be fine. He's got great skills. He will eventually struggle with self-esteem. And if you know my kiddo, he's has no problems with his confidence, right? We need to really protect his self-esteem. Um, and I have to take her, she's working with probably way more kids with ADHD than I am. Has probably seen kids like my son, you know, go from confident to not confident. And so really protecting that self-esteem is a huge, huge one.
that's so
Um,
interesting that you. Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just thinking that what I tend to see is when kids that do okay. This is what parents tell me a lot of times. Parents are doing, kids are doing fine, doing fine, doing fine. Sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. When we take a hit in our self-esteem anyway,
Yep.
and then you need to engage more of your executive functioning at that time and be more independent. And that's when all of these deficits tend to really show up. And that's when we start to see more and more of the
Hmm.
negative comments and as the negative comments start to rack up, the self-esteem starts to go down, those negative self-talk starts to happen more and more, and then you have a learning history, and then they're like, well, forget it. I can't do this. No one's showing
Hmm.
me how. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. So why bother? And then there we are with not going to school, and there's a lot of
Yep.
steps between then and there. But I see that a lot. And that spiral can happen very quickly. And it happens around middle, early high
Hmm.
school is what, middle school in particular.
Yep. And I'm so glad to hear you say that. And I might get emotional talking about it because this is what we are living right now with our oldest is, the academic areas where he has been most
Yeah.
confident and at times even above grade level. He's seventh grade right now, and his scores in some areas are dropping. I think specifically for that executive function reason, right? Like
Yeah.
if you give him the right environment, we know that his skills will exceed expectations, but in the wrong environment or an environment that's not going to support that executive function, right? You start to see
Yeah.
the skills drop and, exactly like you said, the negative comments just almost unmanageable.
Yeah, and why bother? I mean, I just think that
Mhm.
they get to the point, what's it? I'm gonna be yelled at anyway. Like why should I even bother?
Mhm.
And um yeah, it's so I always think about that of just how hard that is to go through your day and
Mhm.
and people are trying to help you, but they don't know really understand or know how. And
Mhm.
so I think I'm so happy we're having this conversation, and I'm so happy that you are going to be talking about this in the CE on Monday, and then on November 3rd, which is a Monday. Um, because the
You
more
scared me
that,
there for a minute.
sorry, time is very funky right now for some reason. On November 3rd, and Candace Cologne did a C for E for me the end of last year, and she talked a lot about executive functioning and talking about in the context of ADHD and focusing on ADHD is so important because, like you said, there's not that much research in our field. There's
Mhm.
not that much, we focused over the years and decades on autism and we forgot or we didn't focus on the needs of
Yeah.
these other amazing kiddos and individuals. And so I'm
Yeah.
hoping there's more attention moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, when I envision what ABA is going to look like 10,
Yeah.
20, 30 years from now, like my hope is, like you think, so my hope is that it's going to look very similar to what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
That you give any BCBA like a general profile of a kid with autism and then say, you know, here sort of quickly a description of the child, their needs, go write a program book for this kid. And you would probably write a decent, comprehensive program book without knowing too much about the child. But if I give you the similar description of a kid with ADHD and said, here, write a program book, would we have that same comprehensive match? And I don't think we're there yet as a field.
Yeah.
But I think we can be there in
Yeah.
10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think for me that space is in supervision. That space starts with, graduate school and teaching
Mhm.
people to be behavior analysts rather than BCBAs. I mean, that's our certification, but really thinking, teaching future generations how to think like behavior analysts, how to problem solve, how to collaborate with
Mhm.
others to fill in those gaps in how we understand why, the people's deficits and how to develop skills and focusing on the skills, like you're saying. And um, I think that we got to start, right in the space of graduate school and supervision. Um, and helping people to
Yeah,
think more broadly.
yeah. And it was interesting to hear you say when we think as behavior analysts, not as BCBAs. um, and it got my mind thinking a little bit about a training that I just started with Stephen Hayes, acceptance and
Hmm.
commitment therapy.
Yeah.
And he pulls out this Beowulf and Risley quote, and I'm like, how have I never heard this? How does this not sound familiar?
Hmm.
This is like, the people.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a quote that he uses a lot that talks about, and it's from their later article, like they had the one in the late 60s, and then they
Yeah.
redid or published
Yeah.
another one in like the 80s, I want to say.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
And they talk about all these sort of mentalistic types of phenomenon, I'm trying to, I don't want to misquote them, so I'm going to skip it. But they said, here are all these sort of mentalistic terms that aren't yet understood as behavior and kind of spoke to the point that as technology improves, right, our understanding of some of this stuff is going to change. And I think part of it is going to be that executive function and, thinking through working memory. Um,
Hmm.
this is such an abstract thing for us as
Hmm.
behavior analysts. Like, what actually is working
Hmm.
memory? But then, as somebody with ADHD, like, I can tell you how it hurts, how it doesn't work for me. And it's actually one of the things, right, that tipped me off to my own diagnosis because when I would meet people for the first time, they would say, oh, hey, my name is Lisa, my name is Ryan, nice to meet you, right? 2 seconds later, it'd be like, oh gosh, what was their name again?
I do
And
that too, Ryan, but I blame it on having three children and
yeah,
being, older. Um,
yeah,
that's what I blame it on. I don't know.
yeah. Um, yeah, and maybe you have ADHD. No, I'm
Maybe
just
I,
kidding.
right. I don't know. I mean, my working memory is not fabulous. It's memory is
Yeah,
not one of my strengths. I have to I use all kinds of tools, right? This is what we
yep,
have to give our kids is tools, right? I use Post-its and remind, I mean, because I don't remember so well. So I need to use all
yeah,
kinds of strategies for myself.
yeah. And so the point here being,
Yeah,
right, what is working memory, right? No matter how what caused it to be impaired, right? For me, ADHD, but what is working memory? How does it affect my
right.
life, right? And for a long time, until I understood, right, I was like, I guess I just don't care enough about people. I guess, right? Like if
Mm,
I can't hear someone's name and then like 10 seconds later, like say, hey, Lisa, how are you? Then I must not care. And that's, obviously not true, but I think that was the story that I started to tell myself, and
uh-huh.
so the focus became on, well, care more about people, and then maybe went like to the extreme of like,
Yeah.
okay, right, after meeting someone, I'm going to use their name 12 times, and and then I'm going to ask them, later in the day, like, hey, Lisa, how are you? Um, yeah. So, thinking, and I really, sorry for the noise back there. Um, But one of the things I talk to parents a lot about is instead of, getting our kids to think about how are they going to change their ADHD, when it comes to something like working memory, let's shift the focus on how are they going to accommodate,
Right. That's right.
you know. And
That's right.
so, you know, kids with ADHD, if they are affected by working memory, are going to need memory aids.
That's right.
Um, and teaching them what those are and how to use them, as opposed to, right, what I was doing to myself, care
Right.
more.
Right. Right, go overboard in the wrong
Yeah.
way, all of those things. And then I think once you figure out the strategies that work and they're practicing and using them, teaching them over time how to self-advocate, right? Making sure you
Hmm.
have the things you need to do what you need to do, and that for me is really important at some point or the whole way, um, teaching them that they
Yeah.
need that and how to get it, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Can
Yeah.
you tell me or tell us what we can expect to learn on November 3rd for your upcoming CE? Can you give us a little teaser?
Yeah. So I have been working on an executive function assessment of sorts. I'm calling it a roadmap. So I will be talking a little bit about that. The reason why I'm calling it a roadmap, right, is it's not going to be an incredibly detailed assessment. It's not going to be like an AFLS or an ABLS. It's going to take you 12 hours. Like if you're trying to get, like I did from Massachusetts to San Diego,
Hmm.
um, just having a basic understanding, right, of which direction do you need to travel, which roads do you need to take. So that's part of the reason why I'm going to call it a roadmap as opposed to an assessment. Also because it hasn't been validated.
Yeah,
Um, but to, talk through some of the skills that are critical, at least in my opinion, to a life of independence. Um,
yeah,
and this was something else I do with parents a lot is thinking through, like when we're in our IEP meetings, thinking through where do you want your kid to land one day? What job do you envision for them? Like, hey, we're just in fifth grade. We don't need to be thinking about that. But I still want you to go through that exercise of think where they're going to land one day. What skills do they have now,
Mm.
and what skills do they need to get here? And so that's sort of the approach with the roadmap is kind of starting with, right, what is independence going to look like in high school? And then kind of working backwards towards elementary, and what skills lead to that in high school. Um, so yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit. Hopefully we'll get into some of those, weird nuances of like can't find materials or won't put them back where they belong, that we sometimes miss with ADHD.
Yeah, and I think getting strategies for one, looking for those things, like what to look for, right?
Hmm.
And the strategies that we can use to support them and teach them to use, like we said, over time. I think
Hmm.
that is so valuable. And that idea of a roadmap is also because I don't think many of us know how to think through it.
Yeah.
So that will be so helpful. Um, and I know that I always think about what's coming next for a kiddo. Like
Hmm.
okay, they're in elementary school. Okay, we got middle school. What do they need to be successful in middle school? Okay, they're
Yeah.
in 2 years, 3 years, they're going to high school. Okay, what do they have to be? Let's look ahead, And so I think that's what you're
Yeah.
saying is that look ahead and
Hmm.
plan and prepare
Yep.
now. And when you have a child with other these kinds of challenges, you can't just wait for that
Yep.
time.
Yep.
So helping us as behavior analysts think through that would be is I'm so
Yeah.
excited. So
Yeah.
helpful.
And part of the reason too is I think there's this big movement in our field to really also think about like what's developmentally appropriate, right? And
Yes.
it makes me giggle because I have done this very thing. My 5-year-old had on his IEP for a while, like, will be on task for a certain percentage of intervals
Yeah,
for like 20 something minutes. And I'm like, at the time he was 4. And I think what 4-year-old is
for
paying
sure.
attention for 25
Oh
minutes?
my gosh.
And, and so I'm like, well, if you guys think you can accomplish that, that would be great. So sure, put it on the IEP. And then, the
Yeah.
next year they're like, thankfully we had a teacher that had a little bit more of a developmental approach and she said, hey,
Yeah.
his baseline is 35 seconds and I think we can get to 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be a consistent 10 minutes. It's, I'm going
That's
to
right.
say this number of intervals across this time. Um,
That,
and
yeah,
that felt so much better to me. You know,
makes so
yeah,
much more sense. And I always look around to see what the other kids are doing. Like in the example I shared
yeah,
before of this ninth grader. Um, okay, let's look at, are all the peers chatting while she's talking, or just the child I'm looking at? Oh, well, like half of them are chatting, since the teacher doesn't have their attention. And she's talking anyway. So is it really a problem? Not really, because everybody else is talking, right? Like she said to move and or this gave the direction and oh a third, the top, the third have moved, and two-thirds are just chatting and hanging out, and so
yeah,
looking at that normative data that we can just observe, in addition to what's developmentally appropriate, I think both of those approaches are really important for the work that we do.
yeah. Yeah, so that'll be some of what's in there. I'm hesitant to really like say it's developmentally normed or anything because it's
Yeah,
really based on, my personal experience and I've tried to streamline it that way, as much as possible. But to, yeah, think what can actually
yeah,
developmentally happen and where do we want them to be
yeah.
and how are we going to get them there?
I love
Um,
that. Well, I am so excited to hear more of your talk on November 3rd. And thank you, Ryan, so much for being here and chatting with me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I have really tried hard to make myself available to anybody who, wants to just schedule a consultation. So, free. I mean, obviously, if you take up all my time, I can't
Right.
do that. But for anybody struggling with an ADHD client, just find my website. You can book a consultation and we can have a quick conversation. Um, Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us what is the name of your company? So if we Google, we can find it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the website is appliedbehavioral.health, and the company is Applied Behavioral Health Practice.
Applied behavioral health practice. Okay,
Yeah,
wonderful. And I'm the CE. Maybe you can give that information as well. And people who are,
absolutely.
that is great. So thank you, Ryan. And this has been Behind the ABA Talk podcast with Lisa Gurdin, myself, and our guest, Ryan Baker-Barrett. Be sure to join us for Ryan's upcoming CE event, Reframing ADHD Intervention as Skill Acquisition Programming and Executive Function, on November 3rd from 12 to 1:30 Eastern Time. And if you cannot come at that time, no worries. You can always watch it on demand on Behavior Live. And you can earn CEUs for joining live or on demand. And we are going to release new podcast episodes every month, about a week before the speaker presents the CE. So you can go to my website, www.aliceGurdonconsulting.com, to learn more about these meaningful continuing education events. All of the topics and speakers are designed to really help us learn and grow from one another, particularly in those areas that where we really need a little boost and we need to inspire one another and share our knowledge. So please check it out and join our community. And thank you again to our CE partners and sponsors, Massachusetts Partnership for Youth, Lab Collaborative, Accept Collaborative, and QBS Safety Care. And we'll see you next time.